Hello everyone. I'm the Crime Teller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, relax, and let's delve into tonight's true crime stories. Case 1. On a rain-slicked Lisbon street, the chill of December 13th, 1979, bit deep. It was a Thursday, just days before Christmas, and the city hummed with a deceptive calm. But beneath the festive veneer, a sinister plot was about to unfold, one that would plunge Portugal into a maelstrom of political intrigue, accusations, and a lingering sense of injustice. The target, José Plácido, a man whose life, interwoven with the nation's turbulent post-revolution years, was about to be brutally extinguished. José Plácido, a figure of significant, if controversial, influence, was more than just a name in the headlines. Born in 1928, his life had mirrored Portugal's own dramatic shifts. He had served in the Policia Judiciaria PJ under the Estado Novo regime, a period of authoritarian rule that had finally crumbled with the Carnation Revolution in April 1974. With the revolution came a seismic shift in power, and Plácido, like many associated with the old order, found himself navigating treacherous new waters. He wasn't a man to fade in the background. However, resourceful and intelligent, he quickly adapted, leveraging his extensive network and understanding of the country's underbelly. He became a prominent, if somewhat enigmatic, figure in the private security and investigation sector, often whispered to be involved in matters bordering on, or perhaps even crossing, the line of legality. He was a man of connections, a fixer, and in the nascent democracy, a figure many still viewed with suspicion due to his past, while others saw him as a necessary evil, a man who could get things done. His personal life, too, reflected a certain complexity, a wife, children, and a reputation for being both fiercely loyal to his own and ruthless to his enemies. The perpetrators, in contrast, were a disparate group, seemingly drawn together by a shared ambition for retribution, or perhaps simply for money. At the heart of the conspiracy stood Antonio Calho, a man with a past checkered by convictions for various crimes, including fraud and armed robbery. Calho was a chameleon, a manipulator, and a man driven by a profound resentment toward Plácido. Their animosity stemmed from a previous professional entanglement that had gone sour, leaving Calho feeling betrayed and financially ruined. He believed Plácido had wronged him, cheated him, and now he sought to settle the score. Assisting Calho were other individuals whose roles, while significant, were ultimately subservient to his machinations. Among them was Francisco Teixeira, a former GNR National Republican Guard officer. Teixeira, a man with a history of disciplinary issues and a tendency towards violence, was desperate for money and susceptible to Calho's promises of a substantial reward. He was the muscle, the enforcer, the one who would carry out the physical act of the assassination. Rounding out the core group were several others, their motivations varying from financial gain to a misguided sense of loyalty to Calho, their lives intersecting in this deadly dance. They were small-time criminals, drifters, and individuals on the fringes of society, drawn into the vortex of Calho's vengeful plot. The genesis of the plot was rooted in Calho's festering animosity. He had meticulously planned his revenge for months, his mind consumed by the perceived injustice at Plácido's hands. He gathered his team, meticulously outlining the details, promising large sums of money that would alleviate their various financial woes. The plan was chillingly simple: ambush Plácido, eliminate him, and vanish into the anonymity of Lisbon's labyrinthine streets. The chosen location for the ambush was Rua Rodrigues Sampaio, a relatively quiet street in central Lisbon, where Plácido resided. It was a street he traversed almost daily, a routine that, in the wrong hands, became a fatal vulnerability. The days leading up to the assassination were a blur of reconnaissance and meticulous preparation. Calho and his accomplices staked out Plácido's apartment, observing his movements, noting his habits. They acquired weapons, a revolver for Teixeira, the designated shooter, and other implements to ensure the smooth execution of their deadly design. The tension among the conspirators was palpable, a volatile cocktail of anticipation and fear. December 13th, 1979. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain. As dusk descended, painting the sky in bruised hues of purple and gray, the conspirators took up their positions. Teixeira, his heart pounding in his chest, gripped the cold metal of the revolver, his gaze fixed on Placido's apartment building. Cal Ho, lurking nearby, directed the operation with a cool, calculating precision. The others, strategically placed, acted as lookouts, ready to signal Placido's approach. At approximately 8 p.m., Jose Placido emerged from his apartment building, his usual stride, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He was alone, heading toward his car. The moment had arrived. As Placido reached his vehicle, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Francisco Teixeira. There was no warning, no shouted threat, only the chilling roar of a gunshot, then another, shattering the quiet of the evening. Placido crumpled to the ground, a silent testament to the brutality of the attack. Teixeira, his mission accomplished, fled into the night, swallowed by the darkness. Cal Ho and the others dispersed, their roles played, their hands stained by the unfolding tragedy. The gunshots echoed through the narrow street, drawing startled residents to their windows. A wave of shock, quickly followed by horror, rippled through the neighborhood. Neighbors rushed to Placido's side, but it was too late. Life ebbed from his body, leaving behind a pool of blood on the damp pavement, a chilling tableau beneath the streetlights. The first responders arrived swiftly, their sirens wailing, adding to the cacophony of a city suddenly thrust into the grim spotlight of a violent crime. The initial scene was chaotic, a desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless. The investigation into Jose Placido's assassination was immediately launched, a monumental undertaking that would test the limits of Portugal's nascent democratic institutions and its law enforcement agencies. The Policia Judiciaria, under immense public and political pressure, began their meticulous work. The crime scene was scoured for evidence, shell casings, fingerprints, anything that could offer a clue to the identities of the perpetrators. Eyewitnesses, though few and often traumatized, were interviewed, their fragmented recollections painstakingly pieced together. Initial leads were scarce, shrouded in the secrecy that often surrounded Placido's own activities. His past, entwined with the complexities of the Estado Novo and the post-revolution era, presented a multitude of potential motives and suspects. Was it political retribution, a business dispute gone wrong, or something more personal? The investigators faced a daunting task, sifting through the whispers and rumors that inevitably followed a man of Placido's stature. However, the PJ, despite the challenges, was relentless. Their focus quickly honed in on individuals known to have grievances with Placido. Antonio Calho's name surfaced early in their inquiries. His contentious history with Placido, the past dealings that had ended in animosity, made him a prime suspect. The investigators began to build a profile of Cal Ho, delving into his criminal record, his associates, and his movements in the days leading up to the assassination. Surveillance operations were initiated. Informants, a crucial component of any major criminal investigation, were activated, their ears to the ground, listening for any snippet of information that could crack the case open. The PJ's persistence began to pay off. Through a combination of meticulous police work, electronic surveillance, and the invaluable assistance of their informants, they began to unravel the conspiracy. A crucial breakthrough came when an informant, emboldened by the promise of protection or a reduced sentence, provided intelligence linking Cal Ho directly to the assassination. This information led the investigators to Francisco Teixeira. Teixeira, a man with a volatile temperament and a history of criminal activity, became the focus of intense scrutiny. The PJ began to establish a connection between Teixeira and Cal Ho, solidifying the theory that Cal Ho had orchestrated the assassination and Teixeira had been the triggerman. The net began to tighten. With increasing evidence, the PJ moved in, apprehending Antonio Cal Ho. His arrest sent shockwaves through certain circles in Lisbon, confirming the suspicions that had been circulating. Under intense questioning, and faced with the mounting evidence against him, Cal Ho, initially defiant, began to crack. He didn't confess immediately, but his denials became less convincing, his story riddled with inconsistencies. Next, Francisco Teixeira was taken into custody. His demeanor was one of initial shock, followed by a simmering resentment. Unlike Calho, Teixeira was less adept at maintaining a facade. The pressure of the interrogation, coupled with the weight of his actions, began to take its toll. He eventually confessed to being the shooter, detailing the events of that fateful night and implicating Calho as the mastermind. His confession, though a turning point, was not without its own complexities, as he attempted to mitigate his own culpability, painting himself as a pawn in Calho's vengeful scheme. The other accomplices, caught in the dragnet, were also apprehended. Their testimonies, though varying in their level of detail and their attempts to minimize their own involvement, corroborated the broader narrative of the conspiracy. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly disparate, were now fitting together, forming a chilling picture of premeditated murder. The legal proceedings that followed were protracted and highly publicized, captivating the nation. The trial of Antonio Calho, Francisco Teixeira, and their co-conspirators became a spectacle, a microcosm of Portugal's struggle to reconcile its past with its present. The prosecution presented a compelling case, supported by a wealth of evidence, forensic reports, eyewitness testimonies, and, crucially, the confessions of the perpetrators. The defense, for its part, attempted to cast doubt on the reliability of the confessions, alleging coercion and manipulation. They sought to portray Placido as a figure who had many enemies, implying alternative motives for the assassination. However, the sheer volume of evidence, coupled with the chilling consistency of the conspirators' accounts, proved insurmountable. In the end, justice, though slow, prevailed. Antonio Calho and Francisco Teixeira were convicted of murder. Calho, as the architect of the plot, received a lengthy prison sentence, a testament to his role in orchestrating the assassination. Teixeira, the one who pulled the trigger, also faced a significant prison term, his freedom stripped away by the violent act he had committed. The other accomplices received varying sentences, their levels of involvement reflected in the judgments. The assassination of José Placido in 1979 left an indelible mark on Portugal. It was a crime that transcended mere violence, touching upon the raw nerves of a nation grappling with its identity in the wake of revolution. The case exposed the lingering shadows of the old regime, the personal vendettas that fester beneath the surface of political change, and the dark underbelly of a society in transition. For years, whispers of political motivations and hidden agendas continued to circulate, fueled by Placido's controversial past. While the courts ultimately ruled on a personal vendetta as the primary motive, the case remained a potent symbol of a turbulent era, a stark reminder that even in a burgeoning democracy, the past could still exact a deadly toll. The echoes of those gunshots on a cold December night in Lisbon continue to reverberate, a haunting testament to the tragic end of a complex man and the chilling precision of a meticulously planned murder. Case 2. The humid air hung heavy over the Elia Mountains, thick with the scent of damp earth, burning rubber, and an unyielding fear that clung to the skin like a shroud. Below, in the valley, plumes of smoke still spiraled lazily into the bruised sky, marking where another village had been cleansed, another whisper of resistance silenced. It was 1983, and the Indonesian occupation of Timor-Leste, a brutal stranglehold that had begun with a swift, devastating invasion in 1975, had settled into a grim, protracted war of attrition. For almost a decade, a nascent nation, barely free from Portuguese colonial rule, had been swallowed whole, its people subjected to a campaign of terror and forced assimilation that shocked the conscience of the world, even as the world largely turned a blind eye. The invasion itself had been a brutal act, launched just days after Timor-Leste declared its independence. The Indonesian military, the Tentara Nasional Indonesia, TNI, swarmed ashore, unleashing a wave of violence that swept through towns and villages. Their objective was clear: eradicate any form of Timorese nationalism and integrate the tiny half-island into the vast Indonesian archipelago. But against this overwhelming force, A defiant spirit had risen from the ashes of shattered dreams. It was embodied in Falintal, the armed wing of Fredolin, the revolutionary front for an independent East Timor. Composed of former colonial soldiers, young idealists, farmers, and students, they melted into the unforgiving terrain of Timor-Leste's central mountains, becoming ghosts in the mist, their resolve hardening with every atrocity committed against their people. One such ghost was Antonio Bello. Before the invasion, he had been a quiet, studious boy with dreams of becoming a teacher, his days filled with the rhythms of village life in La Cluta. He would help his father in the fields, the rich soil clinging to his bare feet, and spend evenings reading by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp, devouring every book he could find. Antonio possessed an innate curiosity and a gentle wisdom beyond his 17 years. But the invasion had shattered that world. He had seen the fires, heard the screams, felt the tremors of distant bombardments. He'd witnessed neighbors rounded up, their faces etched with a terror that would forever haunt his memories. His younger sister, just a child, had disappeared during one such sweep. The innocence of his youth was ripped away, replaced by a burning desire for justice and freedom. He joined Falintal in 1978, trading textbooks for a rusty Mauser rifle, his classroom the unforgiving slopes of Mount Ramelow. He learned to track, to ambush, to survive on roots and berries, his gentle hands becoming adept at dismantling and reassembling weapons in the dead of night. He was no soldier by nature, but a patriot by necessity, driven by the memory of his sister's lost laughter and the unwavering belief that Timor-Leste deserved to breathe free. His comrades became his family, their shared suffering forging bonds stronger than blood. They were thin, often ill, perpetually hungry, but their spirit was an unquenchable flame, fueled by the songs of their ancestors and the dream of an independent flag unfurling over their homeland. The Indonesian military, on the other hand, operated with a chilling efficiency, backed by a seemingly endless supply of arms and men from a powerful nation. Their ideology was rooted in a doctrine of territorial integrity, viewing Timor-Leste's independence movement as a dangerous separatist threat that needed to be crushed at all costs. The soldiers, many of them conscripts themselves, were trained in counterinsurgency tactics, their orders absolute. They were told the Timorese resistance were communists or bandits, dehumanizing them to justify the brutality. Operations were often marked by a scorched earth policy, destroying villages suspected of harboring or supporting Falintal, displacing populations into resettlement camps that were often little more than internment facilities where hunger and disease ran rampant. Executions were common, often summary and extrajudicial. Those suspected of being Falintal members, or even sympathizers, faced unspeakable torture before being killed, their bodies often left as a gruesome mourning. The TNI strategy was not just to defeat the resistance in battle, but to break the will of the entire population, isolating Falintal from its civilian support base. Commanders like Prabowo Subianto, whose units would later gain notoriety, operated with a ruthless determination, employing psychological warfare alongside brute force. The chain of command fostered a culture of impunity, where atrocities went unpunished, and success was measured in the eradication of resistance. The year 1983 was particularly grim. The Indonesian military launched a series of massive offensives, codenamed Operation Seroja, Lotus, aiming to finally wipe out Falintal. One such operation focused on the Central Highlands, a stronghold of resistance, where Antonio and his small unit, led by a battle-hardened veteran named Mateus, were constantly on the move, evading encirclement. The air thrummed with the distant rumble of military convoys, the thud of helicopter blades, and the ever-present threat of discovery. Food was scarce. They survived on wild roots and occasional forays into deserted gardens. Hope, though flickering, was never extinguished. They moved like shadows, their footsteps barely disturbing the fallen leaves, their eyes constantly scanning the dense jungle for any sign of the enemy. The fateful day dawned cool and misty, the kind of morning that promised a brief respite from the sun's oppressive heat. Antonio's unit, numbering just 12 men, had spent the night huddled in a shallow cave, their bodies aching from days of relentless marching. Mateus, ever vigilant, had insisted on a minimal fire, the smoke too dangerous a beacon. Their intelligence, gleaned from a brave village courier, suggested a major TNI sweep was underway, but its exact trajectory remained unknown. They needed to move to find new cover deeper in the mountains. As they ascended a narrow, winding trail, the mist began to lift, revealing the skeletal outlines of burnt trees, a grim testament to the military's recent passage. Suddenly, a twig snapped, not under one of their boots, but close, too close. Mateus froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. A split second later, the jungle erupted. A hail of automatic gunfire tore through the foliage. The TNI had laid an ambush. They had been tracking them for days, perhaps. The element of surprise was complete. Antonio dove for cover, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling his nostrils, the frantic cries of his comrades echoing in his ears. Mateus roared orders, but the unit was scattered, pinned down by overwhelming fire. Antonio scrambled deeper into the undergrowth, his heart hammering against his ribs, his rifle gripped tight. He could hear the shouts of the Indonesian soldiers, their heavy boots crashing through the forest, drawing closer. He saw Mateus, valiantly returning fire, a look of grim determination on his face, before he was cut down, his body slumping to the earth. Despair threatened to consume Antonio, but then he remembered his sister, his village, the dream. He crawled, pushed, wriggled through the dense bushes, ignoring the thorns tearing at his skin, the sounds of battle fading behind him, replaced by the chilling shouts of capture. He knew some of his comrades had been taken. He could hear their pleas, their desperate attempts to bargain for their lives, in silence. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Survival was paramount for the cause, for those who had fallen. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, finally collapsing in a hidden gully, his body trembling, his mind numb with horror. The ambush had decimated Mateus's unit. 6 resistance fighters, including the courageous Mateus, were confirmed killed in the initial onslaught. 3 others, injured and disoriented, were captured. Among them was Joao, a young man from Antonio's village, who had joined Falintal with him. Antonio never saw Joao again after that day. The military reports, issued weeks later and widely distributed by Indonesian propaganda, claimed a decisive victory, reporting terrorists eliminated and communist elements neutralized. No mention was made of the brutal methods, the summary executions, or the fate of those captured. For the families of the fallen and the disappeared, a void opened, filled with agonizing uncertainty. Rumors would trickle down from the mountains, carried by whispers and coded messages. Joao had been interrogated, tortured for information, and then, like so many others, his body disposed of in an unmarked grave, possibly thrown into a ravine or buried hastily in the jungle. His family waited, hoped, prayed, but their prayers were never answered. Joao's name joined the thousands etched onto the silent monuments of loss that permeated every village in Timor-Leste. For years, the killings remained largely undocumented, swallowed by the jungle and the oppressive silence enforced by the Indonesian military. The world remained largely ignorant or indifferent to the scale of the atrocities. After the United Nations-sponsored referendum in 1999, which overwhelmingly voted for independence and triggered a fresh wave of state-sponsored violence before the Indonesian withdrawal, the long, arduous process of reckoning began. The investigation, as it could be called, was not a traditional police probe, but a monumental undertaking to uncover historical truth and seek a semblance of justice. In 2002, the newly independent Timor-Leste established the Commission for Reception, Truth and Reconciliation, CAVR. Its mandate was profound: to inquire into human rights violations committed between 1974 and 1999, provide a public record, and facilitate reconciliation. CAVR undertook extensive documentation, collecting testimonies from thousands of victims and witnesses, including survivors of massacres, former Falintal fighters like Antonio, and even some former Indonesian soldiers who bravely came forward. The scale of the violence was staggering. CAVR's final report, Chega, meaning stop or no more in Portuguese and Tetum, published in 2005, detailed a chilling litany of abuses: systematic torture, sexual violence, forced displacement, enforced disappearances, and, critically, thousands of extrajudicial killings and battlefield executions. The report estimated that at least 18,600 political killings and disappearances had occurred, with the overwhelming majority attributed to the Indonesian military and its auxiliary forces. The Chega report chronicled incidents like the ambush that claimed Mateus and Joao, compiling narratives from multiple sources, attempting to piece together the grim truth from fragmented memories and suppressed records. It highlighted patterns of abuse, identifying specific units and commanders responsible for widespread atrocities, though direct accountability remained elusive. Antonio, now a respected elder in his community, gave his testimony to CAVR, his voice raspy with emotion as he recounted the ambush, the loss of his comrades, and the decades of struggle. He spoke of Joao, not just as a lost friend, but as a symbol of the thousands of young Timorese whose lives were extinguished for the dream of freedom. The investigation also involved exhumations in some known mass grave sites, though the vastness of the country and the passage of time made many such efforts challenging. Human rights organizations and international bodies also played a crucial role, producing their own reports, pressuring Jakarta for accountability, and advocating for the establishment of special courts. However, despite the comprehensive findings of CAVR and international pressure, few high-ranking Indonesian military officials were ever prosecuted for the crimes committed in Timor-Leste. The ad hoc human rights court in Indonesia, established under international pressure, tried a handful of cases, but many were acquitted, and the sentences for those convicted were lenient, widely seen as a whitewash by victims and human rights advocates. The geopolitical realities and the complex relationship between the two nations meant that full legal justice remained an elusive goal. Yet, the legacy of this investigation is not in punitive justice alone, but in the establishment of historical truth and the ongoing fight for remembrance. The Chega report stands as an irrefutable historical document, ensuring that the sacrifices of Mateus, Joao, and the thousands like them are not forgotten. Memorials now the landscape of Timor-Leste, simple stones or humble crosses marking the places where resistance fighters fell, where massacres occurred, where the disappeared vanished. Antonio, now a grandfather, often visits one such memorial, a small, weathered cross near the site of the ambush. He places a hand on the cold stone, a silent communion with the ghosts of his past. The fear no longer hangs in the air, replaced by the scent of a blooming future, but the memories remain, a solemn promise to never forget the thousands of lives sacrificed in the long, dark night of occupation, and the unwavering truth that finally, painstakingly, emerged from the shadows. Case 3. The air in Dili, East Timor, on that crisp November morning of 1991, hummed with a tension as thick as the tropical humidity. 2 decades had passed since the Indonesian military's brutal invasion. 2 decades of occupation, of disappearances, of a people's voice stifled by the heavy boot of a foreign power. Yet, a flicker of defiance persisted, a quiet flame tended in secret meetings, whispered hopes, and the desperate yearning for self-determination. The world, for the most part, looked away, distracted by its own Cold War anxieties, leaving the Timorese to endure a silent, prolonged agony. But that day, the silence was about to be shattered, and the world would be forced, however briefly, to witness. The story of the Santa Cruz tragedy, often referred to as the Dili Massacre, is not merely a tale of a single, horrific event, but a culmination of years of suppressed rage, a desperate cry for freedom echoing through a landscape scarred by conflict. East Timor, a tiny half-island nation, had been a Portuguese colony for centuries before a brief and bloody civil war erupted in 1975, following Portugal's withdrawal. This internal conflict provided the pretext for Indonesia, under the iron fist of General Suharto, to launch a full-scale invasion. Jakarta claimed it was saving the Timorese from communism, but the world knew it was a land grab, a strategic annexation of a resource-rich territory. What followed was a brutal campaign of pacification, a a systematic suppression of all dissent, marked by famine, displacement, and an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 deaths, a quarter to a third of the population, in the initial years of occupation. The Indonesian military, the ABRI, now TNI, established a pervasive and terrifying presence. Soldiers were everywhere, their mere uniforms a symbol of arbitrary power. They controlled movement, speech, and thought, turning a vibrant culture into a hushed, fearful existence. Among the myriad victims of this prolonged occupation, one name had recently been added to the mournful litany: Sebastio Gomez. A young man, barely in his 20s, Sebastio had been shot dead by Indonesian forces just weeks earlier, on October 28th, near the Motil Church. His death, a stark reminder of the ever-present danger, galvanized the already simmering discontent. Sebastio was not a prominent political figure, nor a hardened resistance fighter. He was simply a young Timorese, a member of a generation that had known nothing but occupation, yet clung fiercely to the dream of freedom. His tragic end transformed him into a symbol, a martyr whose funeral would become a defiant act of remembrance and protest. The Indonesian military, the perpetrators of this unfolding tragedy, were an instrument of state power, a vast, disciplined, and often ruthless force. Their command structure was hierarchical, with orders flowing from Jakarta, ultimately from Suharto himself. On the ground, the soldiers were a mix of conscripts and career officers, many indoctrinated with a strong sense of nationalistic duty, viewing the East Timorese resistance as a dangerous separatist movement. Some genuinely believed they were maintaining order and national unity. Others were brutalized by the conflict itself, hardened by years of counterinsurgency warfare, where the lines between civilian and combatant were deliberately blurred. Their identity was less about individual malice and more about systemic violence, a military apparatus trained to suppress, to control, and if necessary, to eliminate opposition. The specific commanders involved on that day, while nameless to the wider world at the time, represented the unyielding will of the Indonesian state. Major General Rudolf Wero, the then military commander for East Timor, and his subordinates were responsible for maintaining order, and their understanding of order was the complete absence of dissent. The timeline of that fateful day, November 12, 1991, began with a somber procession. Thousands of East Timorese, young and old, had gathered at the Motil Church for a memorial mass for Sebastio Gomez. The air was thick with a mixture of grief and simmering defiance. Despite the known dangers of public assembly under Indonesian rule, the sheer number of attendees spoke volumes of their collective courage and sorrow. After the mass, the mourners began to walk towards the Santa Cruz Cemetery, where Sebastio was buried. It was more than a funeral procession. It was a silent march of protest. Many carried banners calling for independence, for peace, for an end to the brutal occupation. Some wore T-shirts with images of East Timorese resistance leader Zanana Gusmio. Their chants, though hushed at first, grew louder, a chorus of Viva Timor-Leste and Independencia. Among the crowd was Kamal Bamid Haj, a young Malaysian student and human rights activist who had traveled to Dili to observe the situation firsthand. He was one of the few international observers present, a brave witness in a land shrouded in secrecy. With him was an Australian journalist, Max Stahl, armed with a video camera, discreetly filming the procession. Their presence, however small, would prove pivotal in breaking the silence. As the procession snaked its way through the narrow streets of Dili, past the colonial-era buildings and the ever-present Indonesian military checkpoints, the tension mounted. Indonesian soldiers, heavily armed and equipped, were already positioned around the Santa Cruz Cemetery. Their presence was a menacing shadow, a clear warning. Yet, the mourners pressed on, their grief overcoming their fear. The atmosphere was charged, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The spark came as the crowd reached the cemetery gates. Without warning, and without any discernible provocation from the largely unarmed crowd, Indonesian soldiers opened fire. The initial bursts of gunfire were met with screams, then chaos. People stumbled, fell, desperately tried to find cover. The initial shots were followed by more, a sustained volley of automatic weapon fire. It wasn't just random shooting, it was a targeted, indiscriminate attack on a mass of civilians. Soldiers charged into the cemetery, bayonets fixed, brutally beating those who tried to flee, shooting those who lay wounded. The scene quickly devolved into a massacre. The cries of the wounded mingled with the shouts of the soldiers. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood. The meticulously tended graves of Santa Cruz, normally a place of quiet remembrance, became a bloody tableau of death and terror. Young men and women, students, elderly mourners, all became targets. Max Stahl, hidden among the chaos, continued to film, his lens capturing the horrific reality as it unfolded. The falling bodies, the desperate attempts to help the injured, the merciless advance of the soldiers. He risked his life, understanding that these images were the only hope for the truth to escape. Kamal Bamidhaj, caught in the melee, was also shot, his young life tragically cut short, a testament to the indiscriminate nature of the violence. The shooting lasted for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was perhaps only minutes. When the guns finally fell silent, the ground was littered with bodies. Estimates vary, but human rights organizations and eyewitnesses later confirmed that at least 271 Timorese civilians were killed that day, with many more wounded, and an unknown number simply disappeared in the immediate aftermath, their bodies hidden by the military to erase evidence. The injured were dragged away, piled onto trucks, and taken to unknown locations, many never to be seen again. The cemetery, once a symbol of peace, had become a monument to brutality. The immediate aftermath was characterized by a chilling efficiency on the part of the Indonesian military. They moved swiftly to control information, threatening eyewitnesses, intimidating journalists, and attempting to confiscate Stahl's footage. However, Stahl, with incredible courage and foresight, managed to smuggle his tapes out of the country, leading to their broadcast on international news networks. The investigation process that followed was protracted, fraught with denial, and ultimately, deeply unsatisfactory for the victims and their families. Initially, Indonesian authorities denied the severity of the massacre, downplaying the death toll and blaming provocateurs among the Timorese. They claimed their soldiers had acted in self-defense, a narrative that crumbled under the weight of eyewitness testimonies and Stahl's irrefutable video evidence. Under international pressure, Jakarta was forced to launch an inquiry. They established a National Commission of Inquiry, KPN, in 1991, which, to some surprise, partially contradicted the military's initial claims, admitting to a large number of deaths. However, the KPN's findings were still widely criticized for minimizing the true death toll and failing to hold high-ranking officers accountable. A few low-ranking soldiers were eventually court-martialed for disobeying orders or excessive actions, but no senior commanders faced serious consequences for ordering or orchestrating the massacre. The justice delivered was token, designed more to placate international outcry than to genuinely address the horrific crime. International human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, along with a growing network of Timorese solidarity groups, played a crucial role in keeping the Santa Cruz tragedy in the global spotlight. They meticulously documented testimonies, cross-referenced reports, and lobbied governments and the United Nations. Their persistent advocacy, fueled by the smuggled footage, slowly but surely eroded Indonesia's claims of legitimacy in East Timor. The massacre, rather than crushing the independence movement, ironically breathed new life into it, drawing unprecedented international attention to the plight of the Timorese people. The long shadow of Santa Cruz stretched for years. It became a powerful symbol, a rallying cry for the Timorese independence movement and for international activists. It exposed the brutal reality of the Indonesian occupation in a way that dry reports and diplomatic protests could not. The silent screams captured on Stahl's tape echoed in the halls of the UN, in the parliaments of democratic nations, and in the hearts of human rights advocates worldwide. It took another 7 years, and the fall of Suharto's authoritarian regime, for the tide to truly turn. In 1999, under immense international pressure, Indonesia finally allowed a UN-supervised referendum on self-determination for East Timor. The Timorese overwhelmingly voted for independence. The transition was not without further violence, orchestrated by pro-Indonesian militias, but the world had seen enough. An international peacekeeping force intervened, and finally, after decades of brutal occupation and immense suffering, East Timor achieved its hard-won independence in 2002, becoming Timor-Leste. Even then, the full justice for the Santa Cruz tragedy remained elusive. While Timor-Leste established its own Commission for Reception, Truth and Reconciliation, CAVR, to document human rights abuses, including the massacre, full accountability from the Indonesian side for the commanders responsible for the Santa Cruz massacre has yet to be achieved. For the survivors, the families of the fallen, and the nation of Timor-Leste, Santa Cruz remains an open wound, a powerful reminder of the cost of freedom and the enduring struggle for justice in the face of unspeakable cruelty. The victims, from Sebastio Gomez to the nameless hundreds who fell that day, continue to cry out from their graves, a silent scream demanding to be heard, demanding that such atrocities never again be forgotten or repeated. The fear that hung heavy in the air on that November morning was replaced, eventually, by the fragile hope of nationhood, but the scars of the Santa Cruz tragedy remain, etched into the soul of a resilient people. Case 4. The air hung heavy and humid over Dili, a shroud of tropical heat and unspoken anxieties. It was late 2010, and Timor-Leste, a young nation forged in the crucible of unimaginable suffering, was still finding its footing. The euphoria of independence, hard-won after centuries of colonial rule and a brutal Indonesian occupation, had begun to recede, replaced by the grinding realities of governance, poverty, and the insidious whispers of old loyalties and new ambitions. In the dusty streets, children chased stray dogs, oblivious to the deeper currents of power shifting beneath the surface of the fledgling democracy. Mateus Mobersores was a name that resonated with hope for many. His nickname, Mober, was itself a tribute, echoing the term used for the common people, the downtrodden masses, whose liberation was the very heart of the resistance movement. Mateus embodied that spirit. Born in a remote mountain village, he had been a child during the Indonesian invasion, witnessing atrocities that seared themselves onto his young soul. He had grown into a lean, almost ascetic man, with eyes that held both the wisdom of suffering and the fire of an unyielding idealism. During the struggle, he had been a clandestine organizer, a poet of resistance whose verses were whispered from village to village, inspiring courage. After independence, he had eschewed the quick path to wealth or high office, choosing instead to work tirelessly with rural communities, building schools, advocating for land rights, and speaking out against corruption wherever he found it. His voice, once a whisper, grew into a roar in the nascent parliament, where he served as an independent deputy, unaligned with the dominant factions of the Fretilin or CNRT parties, yet holding a unique moral authority. His rallies, particularly among the youth and the disillusioned rural population, were growing larger, his message of true accountability and an equitable future striking a powerful chord. Mateus was not just a politician. He was a conscience, a living symbol of the revolution's unfulfilled promise. This made him both beloved and dangerous. On the other side of this burgeoning political divide stood figures like Commander Tomas, Lafique Amaral. Lafique, Crocodile, was a name whispered with a mixture of fear and grudging respect among the old guard. Unlike Mateus, whose resistance had been intellectual and organizational, Lafique had been a man of the jungle, a hardened guerrilla commander who had led daring ambushes and endured unspeakable tortures. His loyalty was not to an ideology, but to the men he had fought alongside, and to the pragmatic maintenance of the power they had bled to attain. After independence, he had transitioned into a shadowy, influential role within the intelligence and security apparatus, a keeper of secrets, an enforcer of unspoken rules. His face, etched with scars, rarely betrayed emotion, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, missed nothing. Lafique viewed the emerging political landscape not as a vibrant democracy, but as a precarious house of cards, constantly threatened by internal dissent and external manipulation. He saw Mateus Soares not as an idealist, but as a destabilizing force, a naive agitator whose rhetoric could ignite dangerous divisions, potentially undoing all they had fought for. In his twisted logic, Mateus was a threat to the nation's hard-won stability, a cancer that needed to be excised before it metastasized. The subtle warnings began months before. Anonymous phone calls to Mateus's small office, the whir of an unfamiliar motorcycle outside his humble Dili home late at night, the sudden cancellation of a village meeting due to unspecified security concerns. Mateus, ever the idealist, dismissed them as the growing pains of a young democracy or the work of petty opportunists. His closest advisors, battle-hardened veterans themselves, urged caution, but Mateus pressed on, his conviction unshaken. He was planning a major address, a speech that would lay bare the systemic corruption he had uncovered, naming names, detailing illicit dealings that reached into the highest echelons of power. The date was set for October 26th, a significant historical anniversary for the resistance. The air was thick with anticipation and dread. On the evening of October 25th, the night before his watershed speech, Mateus was on his way back to Dili from a remote district, where he had been consolidating support for his anti-corruption campaign. He traveled in a battered, unassuming Land Rover, driven by his loyal aide, a quiet young man named Joao, who had served with him since the days of the resistance. The road was rough, winding through dark, forested hills, far from the capital's intermittent streetlights. The monsoon rains had just begun, turning the unpaved sections into slick, muddy traps. They were alone on the isolated stretch, the only sound the rhythmic slosh of the tires and the chirping of unseen insects. Suddenly, the Land Rover's headlights caught a makeshift barrier across the road, a fallen tree trunk. Joao slowed, his instincts screaming. Before he could react, two figures emerged from the dense undergrowth, their faces obscured by balaclavas, wielding automatic rifles. A third figure, taller and more imposing, stepped into the light, his posture unmistakable even in the low visibility. It was Lafik. There was no negotiation, no warning shot. The ambush was swift, brutal, and meticulously planned. Joao was dragged from the driver's seat, a rifle but smashing into his temple, silencing him before he could cry out. Mateus, ever defiant, tried to open his door, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrible understanding. Before he could move, a gloved hand gripped his arm, yanking him out. He stumbled, falling to his knees in the mud. Lafik stood over him, his face a mask of grim determination. Maubert. Lafik's voice was a low growl, devoid of malice, yet colder than any hatred. You push too hard. Some battles are not fought with words. Mateus said nothing, only met Lafik's gaze, a flicker of sorrow, not fear, in his eyes. He understood. This was not a robbery, nor a random act of violence. This was a political execution. The forest swallowed the sounds. The rain washed away the traces, and by dawn, Mateus, the voice of the voiceless, was gone. The news broke like a thunderclap across the young nation. Mateus and his driver, Joao, found dead near a remote road outside Dili. The official announcement spoke of a tragic accident, or unidentified bandits, but the whispers in the coffee shops and market stalls told a different story. Everyone knew Mateus was a target. The outrage was palpable, yet beneath it, a chilling current of fear began to spread. If Mateus, the beloved Maubert, could be silenced so brutally, who was safe? Leading the initial investigation was Inspector Isabel da Costa, a rising star in the National Police of Timor-Leste, PNTL. Young, sharp, and trained in Australia, Isabel was fiercely dedicated to justice, a rare commodity in a system still grappling with corruption and post-conflict trauma. Her small office, cluttered with case files and international policing manuals, became her sanctuary. From a moment she saw the crime scene, the overturned Land Rover, the bodies discreetly moved before she arrived, the distinct lack of forensic evidence. Isabel knew this was no ordinary crime. The precision of the ambush, the professional disposal of the victims, the immediate official narrative of a robbery gone wrong, it all screamed political assassination. Joao's body showed signs of a quick, efficient blow to the head, not a struggle. Mateus's body bore no defensive wounds, only a single, fatal wound, executed with chilling precision. This wasn't the clumsy work of bandits. Isabel faced immediate obstacles. Witnesses were scarce, or too terrified to speak. A farmer living near the road claimed he heard nothing, his eyes darting nervously. Another, an old woman, spoke of strange lights and men with guns, but quickly recanted, citing poor eyesight. The few pieces of physical evidence Isabel managed to secure: a unique tire tread from a heavy vehicle, a faint imprint of a military-style boot, mysteriously disappeared from the evidence locker or were dismissed as irrelevant by her superiors. The chain of command seemed to be actively hindering her efforts, pushing the robbery narrative, urging her to close the case quickly. Her requests for more resources, for access to intelligence reports, were met with polite refusals or outright obstruction. Despite the pressure, Isabel refused to yield. She worked late into the nights, fueled by strong Timorese coffee and a burning sense of injustice. She knew she couldn't rely on official channels. She began to connect with her own network: former resistance contacts, journalists, human rights advocates. She pieced together Mateus's last days, his meetings, the targets of his upcoming speech. The pattern was clear. Mateus had been investigating a complex network of illegal logging and resource exploitation, implicating figures with deep ties to former guerrilla commanders and current government officials. The scale of the corruption was staggering, threatening to undermine the nation's fragile economy and its very sovereignty. Her breakthrough came not from a dramatic discovery, but from a quiet, almost imperceptible detail. Joao's family, grieving and desperate, gave her Mateus's personal effects. Among them was a worn, unassuming notebook, its pages filled with Mateus's precise, elegant handwriting. It was not the damning evidence she sought, but a detailed log of his meetings, his travel plans, and, crucially, a series of codes he used to track sensitive information. Deep within the log, scribbled almost illegibly on a back page, was a series of coordinates, followed by a single word: Lafitte. Isabel's blood ran cold. Coordinates. And Lafitte. It was a fragment, a whisper from the grave. She cross-referenced the coordinates. They pointed to an old, abandoned Falintal, the former armed wing of the resistance, training camp, deep in the mountains, notorious for being a hideout for rogue elements and former combatants who operated outside official oversight. It was a place Lafitte was known to frequent. The connection was tenuous, yet terrifyingly plausible. She couldn't bring this information to her superiors. It would be buried, twisted, or worse, put her own life in danger. She decided to go to the camp herself, taking only a single, trusted junior officer, a young man named David, whose family had also suffered under the occupation and who shared her quiet defiance. Their journey was perilous, through dense jungle and across swollen rivers. The old camp was dilapidated, overgrown, but signs of recent occupation were unmistakable: fresh campfire ashes, discarded ration packs. As they searched, a glint of metal caught Isabel's eye. Buried haphazardly under a pile of leaves was a discarded pistol, its serial number crudely filed off. But Isabel, with her forensic training, noticed something else: a small, almost imperceptible etching on the grip, a stylized crocodile, Lafitte's personal insignia from his guerrilla days, a mark he often left on his personal effects. It was a signature, a boast. The pistol, even without a clear serial number, was a direct link. But how to prove it? Isabel took the risk. She bypassed her immediate superiors and went directly to a highly respected, albeit ailing, judge known for his unblemished integrity, a man who had also been a quiet supporter of Mateus Sors's ideals. She presented her findings: the coordinates, the notebook, the pistol, the pattern of obstruction, and the chilling realization that Mateus had not been killed by anonymous thugs, but by those who believed they were protecting the very revolution he stood for. The judge, listening intently, his face grave, understood the implications. This was not just a murder. It was an assault on the soul of the young nation. He promised to act, but warned Isabel of the immense power she was challenging. The unmasking of Lafitte was not a dramatic courtroom reveal, but a slow, grinding process of political maneuvering and public pressure. The judge, using his remaining influence, initiated an independent inquiry, carefully leaking details to trusted journalists. The public outcry, already simmering, exploded. Protests erupted in Dili, demanding justice for Mateus. Facing overwhelming pressure, and perhaps recognizing that some measure of accountability was necessary to maintain their own legitimacy, the political establishment was forced to act. Commander Lafiq Amaral was eventually arrested, not for Mateus Soares' murder directly, but on a convoluted charge of unlawful command and conspiracy to undermine state security, a charge broad enough to encompass his shadowy activities without exposing the deeper, more dangerous truths. His trial was a tightly controlled affair, the evidence presented carefully curated to avoid implicating higher authorities. He remained silent, a stoic, unrepentant figure, believing himself a patriot who had made difficult choices for the greater good. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a significant victory for justice in a nation where impunity often reigned. But the full truth of Mateus Soares' death, the names of those who orchestrated it, remained submerged in the murky waters of Timor-Leste's complex political currents. Mateus's notebook, with its damning records of corruption, was never fully released. The system, in its own way, had protected itself. Inspector Isabel da Costa, having pushed the boundaries, found herself quietly sidelined, her career stagnating despite her undeniable triumph. She continued to serve, her resolve undiminished, but with a deeper understanding of the shadows that still clung to her young nation. The death of Mateus Maubert Soares left an indelible scar on Timor-Leste. His name became a rallying cry, a reminder that the struggle for true justice and transparent governance was far from over. His story became a silent testament to the enduring perils of power and the quiet courage of those who dared to challenge it, even when the shadows stretched long and hungry over the land they called home. The legacy of his idealism and the chilling efficiency of his demise continued to echo through the hills and valleys of Timor-Leste, a constant whisper of the price paid for both freedom and its betrayal. Case 5. In late May 2005, 18-year-old Natalie Holloway from Mountain Brook, Alabama, traveled to Aruba with 124 classmates and 7 adult chaperones to celebrate their high school graduation. The group checked into the Holiday Inn Resort Aruba along Palm Beach. On the evening of May 29th, Holloway and her friends visited Carlos and Charlie's, a popular nightclub in Oranjestad. There, she met 17-year-old Jorn van der Sloot, a Dutch national residing in Aruba, along with his friends Deepak and Satish Kalpo. The group was seen drinking and dancing together. After the club closed at 1 a.m. on May 30th, Holloway was last seen leaving in a gray Honda with van der Sloot and the Kalpo brothers. She did not return to her hotel room, where her packed luggage and passport remained untouched. Her absence was noted when she failed to appear for the group's scheduled departure later that morning. Upon learning of her daughter's disappearance, Beth Holloway, Natalie's mother, flew to Aruba that same day. She, along with other family members and friends, began searching for Natalie, retracing her steps from the hotel to the nightclub. They also visited the van der Sloot residence, where Jorn initially claimed he had dropped Natalie off at her hotel after their outing. However, surveillance footage did not support this claim. The Aruban authorities initiated a search operation involving local police, volunteers, and assistance from the Dutch military. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of Natalie Holloway was found. Following Natalie Holloway's disappearance on May 30th, 2005, Aruban police began their inquiry by interviewing the last people known to have seen her, Jorn van der Sloot and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. Initially, the three claimed they had driven Holloway to her hotel and left her there around 2 a.m. However, inconsistencies in their stories soon emerged. Deepak initially stated they dropped Holloway off at the hotel entrance, but surveillance footage showed no sign of her return. Van der Sloot's account also shifted multiple times under questioning. Aruban authorities faced pressure from both Holloway's family and American officials. Beth Holloway arrived in Aruba, distributed flyers, and frequently appeared in the media, vocal in her suspicion of van der Sloot and the Kalpo brothers. On June 5, 2005, 2 former hotel security guards were arrested based on van der Sloot and the Kalpo's implication, but this theory quickly unraveled, and the guards were released within days due to lack of evidence. Subsequently, on June 9, 2005, van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were arrested as suspects. Searches of van der Sloot's residence and Deepak Kalpoe's car were conducted, but no incriminating evidence or traces of Holloway were found. Public interest surged as American media covered the disappearance extensively, fueling speculation. As the suspects' stories continued to change, their credibility deteriorated. Despite significant efforts by Aruban investigators and U.S. volunteers, no physical evidence was located. The Kalpoe brothers were released on July 4th, citing insufficient evidence, though van der Sloot remained in custody. Authorities continued to interview witnesses, analyze surveillance footage, and re-examine testimony. As the investigation entered its second month, frustration mounted over the lack of progress. Van der Sloot, still considered a key figure, repeatedly denied harming Holloway. Efforts shifted towards broader search operations, including dredging ponds and examining landfills, but yielded no concrete results. By mid-August 2005, van der Sloot was released from custody under the condition that he remained available for further questioning. At this point, investigators faced a case with no body, no crime scene, and no forensic evidence linking any suspect to a potential crime. The absence of tangible leads marked an impasse that would shape the years to follow. Following their initial arrest, the behavior and statements of Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers remained the focal point of the investigation. Authorities hoped that their continued questioning might yield inconsistencies or new evidence, but the suspects frequently altered their accounts, complicating efforts to reconstruct the events of May 30th. Joran van der Sloot initially claimed he had left Natalie Holloway on the beach near the Marriott Hotel after she asked to see sharks. In later versions, he said he had left her alone while she was still conscious and able to walk. Deepak and Satish Kalpoe, meanwhile, denied ever returning to the beach and stated they had dropped Joran and Natalie off near the hotel. Investigators grew increasingly skeptical of the trio's changing narratives. Phone records and text messages were examined. GPS data from the Kalpoe brothers' vehicle was sought, but ultimately yielded no definitive proof of their whereabouts. The lack of surveillance coverage in several areas made corroboration difficult. Joran's reputation on the island began to surface in interviews, describing him as charismatic but deceptive. Despite mounting suspicion, the legal standard of proof required by the Aruban system remained unmet. Throughout the summer of 2005, the suspects were rearrested multiple times under varying charges, including suspicion of kidnapping and murder. These rearrests often coincided with public developments or media broadcasts suggesting new leads, but no new evidence held under scrutiny. Each time, the suspects were released after the mandatory detention period expired. Investigators were also hindered by the limitations of the Aruban legal system. Without sufficient physical evidence, they were unable to file formal charges. The case began to stall, and public opinion became divided. By the end of 2005, all three suspects had been released from custody. Joran van der Sloot returned to the Netherlands, while the Kalpoe brothers remained on the island. The investigation remained open, but progress had slowed dramatically. Despite the absence of charges, both the FBI and Aruban authorities kept the suspects under observation. The case had taken on international dimensions, but the central challenge remained unchanged. No body, no confession, no forensic trail. From the earliest days of Natalie Holloway's disappearance, media coverage played a pivotal role. American cable networks aired near-continuous updates, turning a local Aruban investigation into a story of national concern. This media intensity brought immediate attention, but also complications. Beth Holloway became a central figure, giving daily interviews, calling for justice, and repeatedly naming Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers as responsible. Her presence kept the story alive and applied pressure on Aruban authorities, but also contributed to strained relations. As weeks passed, television segments, panel discussions, and documentaries explored theories, with speculative narratives often circulating faster than official information. The public consumed conflicting reports. This environment amplified scrutiny on the Aruban government, raising questions about police competence and corruption. In the U.S., calls were made to boycott Aruba, Aruban authorities asserted they were doing everything within their legal framework, but without breakthroughs, their reassurances rang hollow. Media outlets replayed interviews with suspects and aired reenactments. Joran van der Sloot became a figure of obsession, his past and demeanor dissected. At times he gave interviews denying involvement, further stirring public interest. The relentless coverage led to misinformation and fatigue. Rumors circulated about secret recordings and alleged witness intimidation. Social media, though still emerging in 2005, played a growing role. In Aruba, the local population responded with a mix of sympathy and frustration, with tourism declining temporarily. Despite constant attention, tangible developments remained elusive. Beth Holloway made multiple trips to Aruba, often accompanied by media crews. The FBI maintained a presence, but no progress could be publicly confirmed. The case remained at a standstill, locked between conflicting statements and missing evidence. By the end of 2005, Natalie Holloway's disappearance had become one of the most widely covered missing person cases in American media history. Yet, the truth remained out of reach. By early 2006, the Holloway investigation had reached a critical impasse. Despite extensive efforts, Aruban authorities had not discovered a body, weapon, or forensic link. The legal system required significant evidence to bring charges. Investigators faced procedural hurdles. Suspects could only be held for a limited time. The absence of a declared crime scene or forensic material weakened the case. Efforts expanded beyond Aruba with FBI cooperation, but no new physical evidence was found. Underwater searches yielded no concrete results. The legal framework posed another challenge. Without probable cause, suspects could not be indicted. Tensions between the Holloway family and Aruban authorities intensified. Beth Holloway continued to advocate publicly and criticize the perceived inaction. Aruban officials expressed frustration with the intense media scrutiny. Occasionally, alleged new witnesses surfaced, but each statement failed to produce actionable leads. With the absence of concrete evidence, the case began to lose momentum. Media coverage became less frequent. Investigators acknowledged privately that unless a body was recovered or a credible confession made, the chances of resolution were low. The Aruban prosecutor's office formally declared the case inactive in December 2007, citing the exhaustion of all leads. While the case was not closed, active investigation efforts ceased. Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were no longer under legal scrutiny. For the Holloway family, the lack of closure compounded their grief. The disappearance of Natalie Holloway remained unsolved. In early 2008, the Natalie Holloway case returned to international headlines with the release of covert video footage showing Joran van der Sloot, apparently describing Holloway's death. Filmed by a Dutch crime reporter, the recording showed van der Sloot telling an acquaintance that Holloway had collapsed on a beach and died, and he called a friend to help dispose of her body at sea. The footage aired publicly, generating immediate reaction. The Holloway family expressed cautious hope. However, Aruban authorities argued that the circumstances under which the video was recorded, a private conversation while the subject was intoxicated, rendered it inadmissible as formal evidence. Additionally, the story lacked corroboration. Shortly after the broadcast, van der Sloot dismissed his statements as fabrications made while under the influence. He claimed he was simply saying what he thought the undercover individual wanted to hear. His retraction mirrored previous behavior. Multiple versions of events, each different, none supported by facts. Still, the incident renewed global interest and public frustration. In subsequent interviews, van der Sloot offered further contradictions. With each new story, the possibility of uncovering the truth seemed to recede. The Aruban prosecutor briefly reopened the investigation, but again, no physical evidence emerged. The legal threshold for charges remained unmet. By this point, van der Sloot had become a figure of notoriety, giving interviews and alternating between denial, implication, and silence. His behavior deepened public suspicion, but failed to yield results for investigators. Attempts to extradite him were hindered by a lack of jurisdiction and the absence of new verifiable facts. The Holloway family, exhausted by years of retractions and dashed hopes, maintained public pressure. The series of conflicting statements, none of which led to evidence, underscored the limits of the case. Vandersloot's shifting stories did not provide legal grounds for prosecution. As months passed, the case again faded from headlines. Each confession followed by a retraction had become a painful pattern, offering hope and then removing it. The inability to confirm any version of events left the truth obscured by layers of misdirection and deceit. In 2010, the Holloway case intersected with a new crime that reignited international attention. Joran Vandersloot, long considered the prime suspect in Natalie Holloway's disappearance, became the subject of a new investigation, this time in Peru. Earlier that year, Vandersloot had contacted Beth Holloway's legal representative with an offer. In exchange for $250,000, he would reveal the location of Natalie's remains. As part of a sting operation, an initial $25,000 was paid to Vandersloot. He provided false information, leading to his indictment by a U.S. federal grand jury for extortion and wire fraud. Shortly after the extortion scheme became public, Vandersloot traveled to Lima, Peru. On May 30th, 2010, exactly 5 years after Holloway disappeared, he was captured on hotel surveillance footage entering a room with 21-year-old Stephanie Flores. Hours later, she was found dead, beaten, and left under a hotel room mattress. Peruvian police arrested Vandersloot days later near the Chilean border. During initial interrogations, he confessed to killing Flores after discovering she had accessed his laptop and found information about the Holloway case. His confession was used to build the prosecution's case. The murder of Stephanie Flores brought renewed scrutiny to the Aruba case. Critics questioned how Vandersloot had remained free despite years of suspicious behavior. The brutality of the crime and its timing on the anniversary of Holloway's disappearance fueled public outrage. In 2012, Vandersloot was tried in a Peruvian court and pleaded guilty to murder. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. While incarcerated in Peru, he was also indicted by a U.S. federal grand jury for the 2010 extortion attempt. The Flores case marked a significant shift in how authorities and the public viewed Vandersloot. His conviction confirmed he was capable of violence. Though it did not solve the Holloway case, it added weight to suspicions. The developments in Peru re-energized efforts in the United States to pursue justice. In June 2023, Joran Vandersloot was extradited from Peru to the United States to face federal charges of extortion and wire fraud related to the Holloway case. The extradition was part of a temporary agreement. Upon arrival in Birmingham, Alabama, Vandersloot was taken into custody and arraigned. As part of a plea agreement, Vandersloot agreed to provide a detailed account of Natalie Holloway's disappearance. In October 2023, during a court session, he confessed to killing Holloway on a beach in Aruba in May 2005. According to his statement, after Holloway rejected his sexual advances, he bludgeoned her with a cinder block and disposed of her body in the ocean. This confession was corroborated by a polygraph test administered by the FBI. Beth Holloway and her ex-husband Dave Holloway were present in the courtroom during Vandersloot's confession. Beth Holloway later described the experience as deeply painful, but also a form of closure. She acknowledged that despite the confession, Vandersloot could not be prosecuted for murder in the United States, as the crime occurred in Aruba. Following the confession, Vandersloot was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the extortion charges, set to run concurrently with his existing 28-year sentence in Peru for the 2010 murder of Stephanie Flores. After the U.S. proceedings concluded, Vandersloot was returned to Peru. The confession marked a significant development in the long-standing case of Natalie Holloway's disappearance. While it provided answers, the absence of Holloway's remains meant some aspects remained unresolved. Nevertheless, the admission of guilt offered a measure of closure to Holloway's family and brought a degree of finality to a case that had captivated international attention. After Joran Vandersloot's courtroom confession in 2023, the narrative surrounding Natalie Holloway's disappearance shifted. For the first time since 2005, her family had a direct admission from the individual long suspected of her death. Though no physical remains have been recovered, the confession filled the void left by years of silence and misinformation. Beth Holloway addressed the public, stating that Natalie had been murdered by Vandersloot, and this fact, finally acknowledged, brought an end to the unanswered questions. She emphasized that while there would never be full closure without her daughter's body, the legal affirmation of guilt offered peace. Van der Sloot's extortion conviction and confession were seen by many as a form of accountability. The 20-year U.S. sentence, added to his existing term in Peru, ensured he would remain incarcerated for decades. Though he could not be prosecuted for murder under U.S. law, the case's resolution represented a moral and symbolic judgment. In Aruba, the confession reignited discussions about the original investigation, with critics revisiting early missteps and missed opportunities. For years, the case had strained relations between Aruba and the United States. While Van der Sloot's confession provided answers, it also highlighted systemic gaps in legal cooperation. Media coverage reflected on the nearly two-decade journey of the case. Documentaries and news specials explored how the Holloway case had changed public discourse around missing persons and international criminal investigations. One lasting impact was the creation of awareness networks and advocacy groups inspired by Natalie's story, working to improve protocols for missing persons cases, especially those involving international travel. The Holloway case underscored the challenges families face when navigating foreign legal systems. In the years after 2023, Natalie Holloway's name remained synonymous with perseverance in the face of ambiguity. The case had shaped public understanding of media influence, legal limits, and the pursuit of justice without physical evidence. It also reinforced how long justice could take, and how incomplete it might feel even when delivered. For her family, the truth came not through discovery of remains or a courtroom trial for murder, but through the words of the man who had evaded justice for years. His admission, spoken under oath, ended one of the most publicized missing person cases in American history. Natalie Holloway was officially declared dead in 2012, but her story, now anchored by Van der Sloot's confession, remained a cautionary tale and a rallying point for change. Her legacy lived on in efforts to support families of the missing and to reform how international cases are handled, ensuring that others might find answers sooner than her family did. Case 6. Taipei, March 28, 2016. A crisp, indifferent morning descended upon the Shihu district, carrying with it the scent of impending tragedy. The city, a bustling hive of life and ambition, was utterly unaware of the horror about to unfold, a horror that would rip through its veneer of normalcy and expose the chilling depths of human depravity. For the Chen family, it began as an ordinary day, filled with the simple, innocent rituals of domesticity. For Wang Qingyu, it was the culmination of a dark, festering delusion. The Chen family, residing in a quiet apartment building, represented the quintessential Taiwanese dream. Mother, Lu Yin-ting, a woman in her early 30s, radiated warmth and a gentle strength. Her days revolved around the luminous joy of her 4-year-old daughter, Little Light, a nickname that perfectly captured the child's bright, effervescent spirit. Little Light, with her cherubic face and infectious giggle, was the sun around which Lu Yin-ting's world revolved. The family was tight-knit, loving, and entirely unsuspecting of the malevolence that lurked just beyond their doorstep. Lu Yin-ting was a devoted mother, her patience seemingly boundless, her love a constant, unwavering beacon. She nurtured Little Light's curiosity, celebrated her small victories, and faced the everyday challenges of motherhood with grace. Little Light, in turn, was a delightful child, full of innocent wonder and an eagerness to explore the world. She loved her mother fiercely, her small hands often reaching for Lu Yin-ting's in a gesture of pure affection. Theirs was a bond of profound beauty, soon to be shattered by an act of unimaginable cruelty. Across town, a starkly different reality was brewing in the mind of Wang Qingyu. In his mid-30s, Wang was a spectral figure, a man adrift in the turbulent currents of mental illness and social alienation. He harbored a chilling belief, a delusion that had metastasized within his psyche, that he was a descendant of ancient Chinese emperors, and that only by killing a small child could he achieve immortality and be granted a concubine. His existence was a patchwork of petty crimes, drug abuse, and a terrifying detachment from reality. He had dropped out of school early, drifted through a series of menial jobs, and found solace in the shadowy corners of society. His family, though aware of his struggles, had been unable to penetrate the thick walls of his paranoia and increasingly violent ideation. Wang Qingyu was not a man driven by passion or revenge. He was a vessel for a twisted, self-serving fantasy, a walking embodiment of unreasoning malice. He had, in the past, attacked a security guard with a knife, and his erratic behavior was a known, albeit underappreciated, warning sign. He harbored a deep-seated resentment, a feeling of being wronged by a world that refused to acknowledge his perceived grandeur. This resentment, coupled with his increasingly severe mental health issues, propelled him towards an act of unspeakable horror. The morning of March 28th dawned with an almost mocking tranquility. Lu Yinting was preparing to take Little Light to a local children's welfare center. It was a routine outing, a pleasant diversion for mother and daughter. Around 11 a.m., they set out, their figures bright against the urban landscape. As they walked along the street, Wang Qingyu, who had been loitering in the area, a silent predator observing his unsuspecting prey, spotted them. His eyes, devoid of any discernible humanity, fixed upon Little Light. The child, oblivious to the monstrous gaze upon her, skipped ahead, her laughter echoing lightly in the morning air. What transpired next was a scene of unmitigated terror, a tableau ripped from the darkest corners of a nightmare. As Lu Yinting helped her daughter off her bicycle, Wang Qingyu, armed with a meat cleaver, launched his attack. It was swift, brutal, and utterly without warning. He grabbed Little Light, his grip like iron, and began a hack at her tiny form. Lu Yinting, a mother's primal instinct overriding all fear, fought back with a ferocity born of pure love. She screamed, she struggled, she tried to shield her daughter, her body a desperate, futile bulwark against the onslaught. Her cries for help rent the air, but the attack was so sudden, so shockingly violent, that passers-by were frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding before their eyes. The cleaver, wielded with a terrifying, almost mechanical precision, descended again and again. In a matter of agonizing moments, Little Light's innocent life was extinguished, her laughter replaced by a chilling silence. Even then, the brutality did not cease. Wang Qingyu, his face a mask of deranged satisfaction, continued his gruesome work, dismembering the child's body right there on the street. The scene was one of unimaginable carnage, a crimson stain spreading on the pavement, a vibrant life reduced to mangled remains. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Witnesses, their minds reeling from the horror, finally sprang into action. Some rushed to Lu Yinting, who was now clutching her daughter's lifeless, desecrated body, her screams turning into an agonizing, guttural wail of despair. Others, fueled by a righteous fury, converged on Wang Qingyu, restraining him until the police arrived. The air was thick with the stench of blood and the pervasive pall of shock. The silence that followed the initial screams was even more terrifying, a silence heavy with the weight of an unspeakable crime. The arrival of law enforcement transformed the scene into a meticulously managed nightmare. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, cordoned off the area. Forensic teams, their expressions professional but undeniably shaken, began the painstaking process of collecting evidence. Every drop of blood, every discarded item, every minute detail was meticulously documented, photographed, and bagged. The sheer brutality of the crime sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened investigators. The dismemberment of a 4-year-old child was a level of depravity that few had ever encountered. The police, acting swiftly, transported Wang Qingyu to the precinct for interrogation. He was remarkably calm, almost serene, a chilling juxtaposition to the horrific act he had just committed. The interrogation was a descent into the disturbed labyrinth of Wang Qingyu's mind. He spoke of his imperial lineage, his quest for immortality, and the need for a child sacrifice to achieve his twisted goals. His explanations were delusional, rambling, and utterly devoid of remorse. He showed no empathy for his victims, no understanding of the immense suffering he had inflicted. Psychiatrists were brought in, their assessments confirming the severity of his mental illness. However, despite his delusions, prosecutors argued that Wang Qingyu was aware of the illegality of his actions and possessed the capacity to distinguish right from wrong. They maintained that his mental state, while disturbed, did not absolve him of culpability for the calculated and deliberate murder of a child and her mother. As the investigation continued, the media descended upon the case with an insatiable hunger. News channels broadcasted chilling details, newspapers plastered images of the scene on their front pages, and social media exploded with outrage. The public, horrified and grief-stricken, demanded answers. The case became a crucible for a heated national debate about the death penalty. Taiwan, with its complex and often contradictory stance on capital punishment, found itself grappling with a profound moral dilemma. On one side were those who cried for immediate execution, arguing that only the ultimate punishment could truly avenge such a monstrous crime and deter future acts of similar brutality. Their voices were loud, fueled by raw emotion and a desire for absolute justice. They pointed to Wang Qingyu's lack of remorse, his history of violence, and the unspeakable nature of his actions as irrefutable proof that he deserved to die. On the other side were human rights advocates and abolitionists, who argued against the death penalty, even in cases of extreme brutality. They emphasized the irreversible nature of capital punishment, the potential for wrongful convictions, and the ethical implications of state-sanctioned killing. They highlighted Wang Qingyu's severe mental illness, arguing that it complicated the moral landscape of the case and that proper treatment and rehabilitation, rather than execution, should be the focus. They asserted that the death penalty was a relic of a more primitive age, that it did not truly deter crime, and that it only perpetuated a cycle of violence. The debate raged in living rooms, on television shows, and in the halls of power, exposing the deep fissures in Taiwanese society regarding justice and punishment. The trial of Wang Qingyu was a grueling ordeal. Liu Yinting's family, consumed by an unimaginable grief, sat through the harrowing testimony, forced to relive the most horrific moments of their lives. Wang Qingyu, often impassive, sometimes muttering to himself, remained a chilling enigma. The court heard detailed accounts of the crime, reviewed the forensic evidence, and listened to expert testimony on Wang's mental state. The prosecution presented a strong case for murder, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the attack and the extreme cruelty inflicted upon the victims. The defense argued for leniency, citing Wang's history of mental illness and his delusional beliefs. Ultimately, the court delivered its verdict. Wang Qingyu was found guilty of murder. The severity of the crime, the vulnerability of the victims, and the chilling lack of remorse exhibited by the perpetrator led the court to impose the death penalty. The ruling was met with a mixture of relief and renewed debate. For many, it was a just outcome, a necessary retribution for an unforgivable act. For others, it was a somber reminder of the complexities of justice and the enduring questions surrounding the ultimate punishment. The Chun family murder case, forever etched in the annals of Taiwan's true crime history, served as a stark and brutal awakening. It exposed the fragility of life, the insidious nature of unchecked mental illness, and the enduring struggle to reconcile justice with compassion. The image of Little Light, her innocent laughter extinguished on a Taipei street, became a haunting symbol of the tragedy, a testament to the fact that even in a seemingly safe and modern society, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface, waiting to claim its next victim. The merciless killer had left an indelible scar, not just on the Chin family, but on the very soul of a nation, forcing it to confront the uncomfortable truths about crime, punishment, and the elusive nature of true justice. Case 7. Agnes Tyrop, born on October 23, 1995, in Yusen Gisha County, was a rising star with a trajectory pointed firmly towards Olympic gold. From a humble background, she had found her calling early, running 5 kilometers to and from school with her brother. Her innate talent was quickly recognized, and she became a junior sensation, winning the 2015 World Cross Country Championships at a mere 19, making her the second youngest gold medalist in the women's race after Zola Budd. Her career was a testament to her dedication, discipline, and an almost ethereal ability to glide across distances. She was known for her quiet demeanor, her humble spirit, and a smile that could light up any room. Her Her success brought not only personal glory, but also a lifeline to her family, as she actively supported her parents and siblings, paying school fees and providing much-needed financial assistance. Yet, behind the gleaming medals and record-breaking performances, a shadow loomed. Agnes's relationship with her husband, Ibrahim Rodic, was a turbulent secret she had meticulously kept from her friends and even some family. Rodic, an aspiring coach whom Agnes had met in secondary school, had gradually become more than just a partner. He was, according to later testimonies, a controller. Her family and paysetter would reveal a pattern of abuse. Rodic allegedly spent Agnes's earnings, didn't allow her to communicate freely with her family, and would assault her when she questioned him. This was not a partnership of equals, but a possessive dominion. The night before the discovery, October 12th, Agnes's younger sister, Everline Jepjitic, who lived with them, had heard a bitter, prolonged quarrel between Agnes and Rodic. The next morning, Everline was horrified to find Agnes badly beaten. The details of that fateful night remained shrouded in the horror of what followed. When authorities arrived at Agnes's home on October 13th, it was a scene of unspeakable tragedy. Her body lay on the bed, a pool of blood staining the floor. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her neck and abdomen. Her car windows were shattered, suggesting a violent struggle. Ibrahim Rodic was nowhere to be found. The alarm bells rang almost immediately. Rodic had called his family, distraught and crying, asking for God's forgiveness for something he had done. The confession, however veiled, pointed directly to him. A nationwide manhunt was launched. Police, armed with the knowledge of his frantic call, began their pursuit. The chase was long and dramatic, stretching across hundreds of kilometers. Rodic, desperate to escape, drove relentlessly towards the coast, aiming to flee the country. The high-speed pursuit culminated in a violent crash near Mombasa, where he rammed his getaway vehicle into a truck. He was finally apprehended, sweating and tense, in Changamwe, Mombasa County, still in possession of Agnes's cell phone. The investigation that followed began to peel back the layers of Agnes's private torment. Her family's testimony painted a grim picture of financial exploitation and relentless control. Her father and brother recounted how Rodic had isolated Agnes from them, restricting her ability to provide them financial assistance. Her longtime coach, Joseph Cherami, and Italian athletics manager, Gianni Demidona, both voiced concerns about Agnes's safety, noting her strained relationship with Rodic and fears that a new lover might have further inflamed his possessive tendencies. In December 2023, a suicide note allegedly written by Rodic was introduced in court, in which he claimed their relationship was toxic and that he considered suicide. However, he pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. Agnes Tyrop's murder sent shockwaves not just through Kenya, but across the international athletics community and the world. Her funeral, held on what would have been her 26th birthday, saw over 1,000 mourners gather in her hometown of Kapnyamisa, Nandi County. The grief was palpable, but so too was a burgeoning rage. Fellow athletes, friends, and family spoke out, demanding an end to the pervasive issue of domestic violence and femicide in Kenya. Viola Laggett, a friend and elite runner, delivered a powerful eulogy that became a rallying cry. "We are here because we are putting our sister to rest, but we are also here to raise our voices. We need to be heard as women. We need people to understand that we are not tools. We are not anyone's property." Agnes's tragic death illuminated a darker truth about the lives of many young female athletes in Kenya. Women who, often from humble backgrounds, find financial independence through sport only to become targets for abusive partners who seek to control their earnings and their lives. The murder became a catalyst. Soon after, Tyrop's Angels, an NGO dedicated to fighting gender-based violence in Kenya and beyond, was founded by fellow athletes, including Laggett and Marion Googie. Their mission, to educate young girls about gender-based violence, empower female athletes to manage their own finances, and provide a support system where fear and stigma once silenced victims. They began advocating for legal changes, increased jail time for perpetrators, and the establishment of hotlines and counseling services. The case of Agnes Tyrop continues through the Kenyan legal system, with Ibrahim Rodic out on bail as of November 2023, awaiting trial. The pursuit of justice for Agnes is ongoing, but her legacy has transcended the tragedy of her death. Her story, though heartbreaking, has ignited a vital conversation, forcing Kenya to confront a deeply rooted societal problem. Agnes Tirop, the formidable runner who broke records and inspired a nation, became, in her death, a powerful symbol in the fight for women's safety and autonomy, forever changing the landscape for female athletes in Kenya. Case 8. Joran van der Sloot, a Dutch citizen, was no stranger to notoriety. His name had been whispered in hushed tones across international headlines since 2005, inextricably linked to the baffling disappearance of Natalie Holloway in Aruba. The then 17-year-old American high school student had vanished without a trace after a night out with van der Sloot and two Surinamese brothers. Despite years of intense scrutiny, multiple arrests, and endless media speculation, Natalie's case remained unsolved, a persistent, gnawing mystery. Van der Sloot, a master manipulator with an unsettling charm, had consistently maintained his innocence, even as the circumstantial evidence piled up. He had even appeared on television programs, offering conflicting accounts, weaving a tangled web of deceit that left investigators and the public frustrated and suspicious. He was a chameleon, adapting his persona to fit the narrative, a man seemingly without conscience, drifting through life with an air of impunity. His journey to Peru was not one of tourism or legitimate business. It was a path that would culminate in a horrific act, a perverse echo of his past. The poker tables of Lima's Atlantic City Casino, a haven of flashing lights and hushed bets, became the unwitting stage for this fateful encounter. It was the early hours of May 30th, 2010, just days after van der Sloot had arrived in Peru. Stephanie, enjoying a night out, found herself seated near the Dutchman. He was charismatic, attentive, and seemingly harmless. He projected an aura of casual affluence, a facade that easily lulled the unsuspecting. They struck up a conversation, their words lost amidst the clatter of chips and the murmur of the crowd. The CCTV footage from the casino, later to become crucial evidence, captured their interaction, a seemingly innocent exchange between two individuals. Stephanie, with her inherent trust and open nature, had no reason to suspect the darkness lurking beneath van der Sloot's composed exterior. As the night wore on, the casino's vibrant energy began to wane. Around 5 a.m., Stephanie and van der Sloot left the casino together, the cameras capturing their exit, a haunting prelude to the tragedy that was about to unfold. They entered a taxi and drove to the Hotel TAC, a modest establishment just a few blocks away. The hotel's surveillance footage showed them entering the building, their movements seemingly unhurried, almost casual. This was the last time Stephanie Flores Ramirez was seen alive by anyone other than her killer. Inside room 309 of the Hotel TAC, the veneer of casual companionship quickly dissolved. The precise details of what transpired within those walls remained shrouded in the chilling intimacy of a violent act. However, the prosecution would later paint a grim picture based on van der Sloot's own shifting confessions and forensic evidence. It was alleged that after an argument, possibly fueled by Stephanie discovering his infamous connection to the Natalie Holloway case on his laptop, a violent struggle ensued. Joran van der Sloot, a man with a history of rage and a chilling disregard for human life, escalated the confrontation into a brutal assault. He confessed to striking Stephanie, then strangling her, his hands extinguishing the vibrant life that had just hours before been full of promise. The silence that followed must have been deafening, a stark contrast to the lively casino atmosphere they had shared. The morning light, filtering through the hotel room window, did not bring revelation, but rather a chilling calm. Van der Sloot, remarkably composed, was captured by the hotel security cameras leaving room 309 alone at approximately 8:14 a.m. He carried a backpack, his demeanor betraying no hint of the horror he had left behind. He proceeded to buy coffee and bread, a mundane act that belied the unspeakable crime he had just committed. He then returned to the room, where he remained for several hours, a chilling testament to his cold-blooded detachment. Later that afternoon, he was seen leaving the hotel for good, carrying Stephanie's laptop and credit cards, calmly walking away as if nothing untoward had occurred. His escape plan was already in motion. Back at the Flores residence, A growing unease settled over the family as Stephanie failed to return home. Her father, Ricardo Flores, a man of influence and connections, immediately activated his network. The initial calls to her cell phone went unanswered, deepening the sense of dread. By May 31st, a missing person report was filed, and the search for Stephanie began in earnest. The family's desperation mounted with each passing hour, their hopes slowly eroding into a gnawing fear. The breakthrough came on June 2nd, when the hotel staff, noticing a foul odor emanating from room 309, forced their way in. The scene that greeted them was horrifying. Stephanie Flores Ramirez lay dead, her young life brutally extinguished. The discovery sent shockwaves through Lima and reignited the international media frenzy surrounding Jorn van der Sloot. The Peruvian authorities, recognizing the gravity of the case and the international implications, launched a swift and intensive investigation. The Hotel TC surveillance footage became the cornerstone of the investigation. The clear images of Stephanie and van der Sloot entering the hotel, and van der Sloot leaving alone, provided irrefutable evidence of his presence at the crime scene. The timeline meticulously reconstructed by investigators painted a damning picture. The forensic examination of the room yielded further crucial evidence, linking van der Sloot directly to the murder. As news of the discovery broke, the hunt for Jorn van der Sloot began. He had fled Peru, embarking on a desperate dash across the border into Chile. The international pressure mounted, and the Peruvian authorities, in close collaboration with their Chilean counterparts, intensified the pursuit. Van der Sloot, ever the elusive figure, was finally apprehended in Chile on June 3, 2010, just days after Stephanie's murder. His capture brought a collective sigh of relief, but also a renewed sense of urgency to bring justice for Stephanie and, perhaps, for Natalie Holloway. During his interrogation in Peru, van der Sloot initially offered a familiar pattern of denial and evasiveness. However, faced with the overwhelming evidence, and perhaps recognizing the futility of further deception, he began to crack. His confessions, though at times conflicting and self-serving, painted a disturbing picture of his psychological state. He claimed to have flown into a rage after Stephanie found information about his involvement in the Holloway case on his laptop. He admitted to striking her, then strangling her. His account, while offering some detail, lacked true remorse, instead focusing on his own perceived victimhood. He described covering her face with his shirt and fleeing, seemingly unfazed by the life he had just extinguished. The trial of Jorn van der Sloot in Peru was a highly anticipated event, drawing international media attention. Ricardo Flores, Stephanie's grieving father, became a vocal advocate for justice, pushing tirelessly for the maximum penalty. The prosecution meticulously presented their case, building a formidable argument based on the surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and van der Sloot's own admissions. The defense, meanwhile, attempted to paint a picture of diminished responsibility, citing his troubled past and alleged psychological issues. On January 11, 2012, Jorn van der Sloot stood before the Peruvian court and pleaded guilty to the murder of Stephanie Flores Ramirez. His plea, perhaps a strategic move to avoid a longer trial and potentially harsher sentence, brought a degree of closure to the Flores family. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison for her murder and ordered to pay $75,000 in reparations to the Flores family. The judge, in delivering the sentence, emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime and the lack of remorse displayed by the perpetrator. The sentencing of Jorn van der Sloot for Stephanie Flores' murder brought a measure of justice to her family, but it also reignited the painful memories surrounding Natalie Holloway's disappearance. For many, Stephanie's case was a tragic confirmation of van der Sloot's predatory nature, a chilling testament to the fact that had he been held accountable for Natalie's disappearance, Stephanie might still be alive. From the confines of a Peruvian prison, Jorn van der Sloot's name continues to surface in relation to the Natalie Holloway case. In 2014, he was indicted in the United States on charges of extortion and wire fraud for allegedly trying to extort money from Natalie Holloway's mother in exchange for information about the location of her daughter's remains. This further underscored his manipulative character and his seemingly endless capacity for deceit. In June 2023, he was temporarily extradited to the United States to face these charges, a development that brought a glimmer of hope for answers in the Holloway case, even as it kept the memory of Stephanie Flores tragically alive. The murder of Stephanie Flores Ramirez stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked malice. It is a story of a vibrant life brutally cut short, a family forever scarred, and a perpetrator whose dark shadow stretches across 2 continents and 2 unsolved mysteries. Stephanie's memory lives on, a testament to the fragility of life and the enduring fight for justice, even in the face of unspeakable evil. Her story, intertwined with the chilling legacy of Joran van der Sloot, remains a poignant chapter in the annals of true crime, a somber warning of the darkness that can lurk beneath a charming facade. Case 9. Villy Barrows, a man whose career had been a testament to his intelligence and ambition, began as a respected neurosurgeon. His ascent through the ranks of the medical establishment was swift, culminating in his appointment as Minister of Health in January 2020. At the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, he was hailed as a national hero, his calm demeanor and seemingly decisive actions instilling a rare sense of trust in a population often cynical about its political leaders. He became the face of Croatia's fight against a global scourge, his daily briefings a source of reassurance. But beneath the veneer of competency and public adoration, a different narrative was quietly unfolding, one of whispers and backroom deals. The victim in this sprawling tale was not a single individual, but the Croatian public itself. Every citizen, from the overworked doctor in a rural clinic to the elderly patient awaiting critical treatment, was implicitly defrauded. The alleged crimes, centered on the procurement of vital medical software and services during the height of the pandemic, diverted desperately needed funds, jeopardizing the very healthcare system Barrows was sworn to protect. The true cost would be measured not just in inflated invoices, but in the erosion of trust, a dangerous contagion in its own right. The central perpetrator, Villy Barrows, maintained his innocence, his lawyer steadfastly denying any criminal responsibility. Yet, the accusations painted a damning picture of a man who allegedly leveraged his powerful position for personal gain and to favor specific companies. He was a product of the Croatian Democratic Union HDZ, a party that, despite its role in establishing Croatia's independence and guiding it towards the EU, had a long and troubled history with corruption allegations. This systemic issue, often ranking Croatia among the most corrupt EU states, provided fertile ground for illicit activities to flourish, even within the critical sector of public health. The web of alleged conspirators extended beyond Barrows. The European Public Prosecutor's Office EPPO in Zagreb, a relatively new but formidable independent body, launched an investigation into 8 individuals, including Barrows and the directors of 2 prominent Zagreb hospitals. Also implicated were 2 companies, allegedly acting as conduits for the illicit schemes. One such figure was Sasa Pazder, owner of Medical Innovation Solutions MISDO, a Zagreb-based company specializing in medical equipment. Pazder, previously unknown to the wider public, suddenly found himself at the epicenter of the scandal, accused of orchestrating schemes to secure undue financial gains for his companies. The timeline of the alleged crimes, as pieced together by investigators, stretched from June 2022 to November 2024. During this period, the suspects, including Pazder, allegedly teamed up to manipulate public procurement processes for medical equipment. Their modus operandi involved offering bribes to relevant stakeholders within the public health system. In one particularly egregious instance, Barrows, in exchange for a bribe, allegedly issued approvals for the purchase of operating microscopes at astronomically inflated prices, siphoning off an estimated $654,000 from the Croatian national budget. This wasn't an isolated incident. The prosecutors alleged at least 4 such attempts to rig bids, though one attempt for an EU-funded project in Split was reportedly rebuffed. The investigation process, while largely conducted in the shadows for a period, culminated dramatically on that November morning. The Croatian Office for the Suppression of Corruption and Organized Crime USCIC, working in parallel with the EPPO, made the arrests. Prime Minister Andrej Plenković, facing intense public and international scrutiny, swiftly moved to sack Barrows, publicly declaring his disgust at the idea of anyone exploiting the healthcare system for personal enrichment. This swift action, while appearing decisive, also highlighted the deep-seated nature of corruption within Croatian politics. The case presented a complex jurisdictional challenge. While the EPPO, as an EU body, focused on crimes affecting the EU budget, Croatian authorities also pursued their own investigation, initially leading to some friction regarding who would handle the high-profile case. Ultimately, the Croatian state attorney Ivan Turudic decided that USKIC was authorized to proceed, arguing that the primary impact of the alleged crimes was on the Croatian national budget, rather than directly on EU funds. Despite this, the EPPO's continued involvement underscored the gravity and transnational implications of the alleged corruption. As the legal proceedings began, Barrows continued to deny all wrongdoing, his lawyer stating he would completely deny any criminal responsibility. But the weight of evidence being meticulously gathered by investigators painted a different picture. The public, initially hopeful and trusting during the pandemic's early days, now watched with a mix of anger and weary familiarity. The Vili Barrows case became a stark reminder of the persistent struggle against corruption in Croatia, a battle that constantly threatened to undermine the very fabric of its institutions and the well-being of its citizens. The unfolding drama served as a grim testament to the enduring challenge of safeguarding public trust in a nation perpetually wrestling with the shadows of its past. Case 10. The whispers began subtly, a faint tremor in the undercurrent of Jakarta's bustling streets, of young women disappearing with promises of a brighter future. These were not the desperate, impoverished souls one might typically imagine. Many were driven by the universal desire for economic betterment, dreaming of supporting their families, of a life beyond the daily struggle. They were lured by slick-tongued recruiters, their words painted with the vibrant hues of opportunity in the distant, prosperous land of Australia. A legitimate job, they were told, a steady income, a chance to truly thrive. For women like Sari, a bright-eyed 22-year-old with a family to support, or the younger, more timid Anya, barely 18, the dream was a powerful current, sweeping them towards an unknown shore. The orchestrator of this insidious symphony was a man known only as Batman in the criminal underworld, later identified as SS, an Australian national. His counterpart in Indonesia, FLA, a 36-year-old recruiter, was the silver-tongued serpent, weaving tales of lucrative work in Australian cities. FLA, operating from a clandestine network across Java, specifically targeted women, convincing them to sign seemingly official-looking agreements. These documents, presented as contracts for various forms of employment, were in reality chains, binding them to a predatory profit-sharing scheme. A chilling clause, a promissory note of 50 million Indonesian rupiah, approximately 5,000 Australian dollars as collateral, ensured their compliance should they dare to break the unwritten, brutal terms of their enslavement. The victims, unknowingly trading their freedom for an illusion, were instructed on how to navigate immigration, given false narratives to tell border agents, and then funneled onto flights bound for Sydney. The syndicate, operational since at least 2019, was a well-oiled machine. Once in Australia, the facade crumbled. The promised jobs as nannies or housekeepers vanished, replaced by the grim reality of forced sex work. Batman, the onshore facilitator, was their cruel master. He managed their movements, housed them in overcrowded, often squalid conditions, and controlled every aspect of their lives. Their passports were confiscated, their movements restricted, their earnings, if they saw any at all, were a pittance, barely enough to cover the exorbitant debts they were constantly told they owed. The fear of the 50 million Indonesian rupiah promissory note, a debt they could never repay, hung over them like a shroud, a constant threat of ruin for their families back home. They were paraded through various brothels across Sydney, their bodies commodified, their spirits slowly crushed under the weight of unrelenting exploitation. The intricate web spun by this transnational syndicate eventually began to fray. In December 2022, intelligence reached the Australian Federal Police, AFP. Whispers of foreign nationals arriving in Australia on legitimate visas, only to be forced into sexual servitude, sparked the launch of Operation Mirani. It was a complex, multi-agency investigation, a desperate race against time to unmask the puppeteers and rescue their victims. The AFP, in close coordination with the Department of Home Affairs and, critically, the Indonesian National Police INP, began to piece together the fragments of a dark puzzle. Investigators in Australia started by scrutinizing migration patterns, looking for anomalies, for individuals whose visa conditions seemed to be a smokescreen for illicit activities. They identified the Arncliffe Man, SS, as the alleged principal of the Australian arm of the syndicate. His name, Batman, whispered in the shadowy corners of the sex industry, now carried a sinister weight for law enforcement. Simultaneously, the AFP's international network reached out to their counterparts in Indonesia. The INP, armed with the Australian intelligence, launched their own parallel investigation. The collaborative efforts bore fruit in March 2024. In a synchronized strike, the AFP executed search warrants at properties in Arncliffe and Banksia, Sydney, suspected of being safe houses or operational hubs for the syndicate. The scenes were stark. Multiple foreign nationals, predominantly women, were found, clearly living in conditions far removed from the promises they had been given. Their vulnerability was palpable, their relief at the arrival of authorities mixed with deep-seated fear. Travel documents, identity materials, and electronic devices were seized, each piece a potential clue, a key to unlocking the full extent of the network. Concurrently, thousands of miles away in Jakarta, INP officers, guided by the AFP's intelligence, descended upon the home of FLA, the Indonesian recruiter. The raid was swift and decisive. Inside, they found a trove of evidence. Multiple passports belonging to other women who were next in line, unknowingly destined for the same cruel fate in Australia. FLA, the architect of their deception, was arrested and charged under Indonesia's rigorous human trafficking laws, facing a maximum penalty of 17 years imprisonment. The arrests were a significant breakthrough, but the investigation continued its relentless march. In May 2024, the AFP and the Australian Border Force ABF conducted further raids on 3 brothels across Sydney. More women, allegedly engaged in sex work in blatant violation of their visa conditions, were located and identified as potential victims. The scale of the exploitation was becoming increasingly clear. At least 50 Indonesian nationals were believed to have fallen prey to this one syndicate alone. The net tightened around Batman. On July 10, 2024, the alleged Australian ringleader, SS, was arrested at his Arncliffe home. The charges were damning: trafficking in children, with a maximum penalty of 25 years imprisonment, and domestic trafficking of children on multiple occasions. It was revealed that the syndicate had even trafficked a 17-year-old from Indonesia to Sydney for sex work. Further charges against SS emerged in October 2024, including using a carriage service to access child abuse material and possessing child abuse material, deepening the depravity of his operations. The investigation also uncovered how the syndicate would fraudulently enroll victims in educational institutions to prolong their stay in Australia, forcing them into the sex industry instead of attending classes. The collaboration between the AFP and the INP, an unprecedented example of international law enforcement cooperation, proved instrumental in dismantling this elaborate criminal enterprise. The victims, shattered but now safe, began the arduous journey of recovery, supported by victim services. The arrests of FLA and SS sent a clear, resounding message. The invisible chains of human trafficking, however skillfully forged across borders, would be broken. The whispers of despair were slowly replaced by the resolute echoes of justice, a testament to the unwavering commitment to protect the vulnerable from the shadows of exploitation. Case 11. The platinum mine at Marikana, operated by lawmen, was a sprawling behemoth, its vast maw devouring the earth to extract a metal vital for catalytic converters, jewelry, and investment. But beneath the polished veneer of lawmen's corporate image, a simmering resentment festered amongst its workforce. For years, the rock drill operators, the unsung heroes who bore the brunt of the physically demanding and dangerous work, had felt exploited. Their wages, they argued, were a pittance compared to the dangers they faced and the profits their labor generated. They lived in squalid shacks, often without basic sanitation or electricity, while lawman executives enjoyed opulent lifestyles. The existing National Union of Mine Workers NUM, once a champion of workers' rights during the anti-apartheid struggle, was increasingly perceived as being too close to management, its leaders enjoying privileges that distanced them from the everyday struggles of their members. The genesis of the tragedy lay in this profound disillusionment. Frustration, a slow-burning fuse, ignited on August 10th. A spontaneous, wildcat strike erupted, initiated by rock drill operators demanding a monthly net wage over $12,500, a significant increase that they believed was fair and necessary for a decent living. This wasn't a formal union action. It was an organic uprising of desperate men, pushed to their breaking point. The miners, 1,000 strong, gathered on a kopje, a small hill, near the mine, a defiant silhouette against the vast landscape. They armed themselves with traditional weapons, pongas, spears, and knobkerries, symbols of their cultural heritage, and, now, their desperate resolve. These were men forged in hardship, many of them migrant workers from rural areas, supporting extended families back home. Their faces, etched with fatigue and frustration, spoke volumes of their unwavering commitment to this fight for dignity. They were not criminals. They were fathers, brothers, and sons, fighting for a share of the wealth they helped create. The perpetrator in this chilling narrative was not an individual, but an institution. The South African Police Service SAPS, an organization still struggling to shed the legacy of its apartheid-era brutality. Backed by lawmen and the South African government, SAPS was deployed to Marikana with a clear mandate: to disperse the striking miners and restore order. The political pressure was immense. The Minister of Police, Nathim Thethwa, and the Minister of Mineral Resources, Susan Shabangu, were vocal in their condemnation of the strike, framing it as an illegal act of violence. The narrative quickly shifted from a labor dispute to a law and order problem, effectively dehumanizing the striking miners and paving the way for a harsh response. The scene was set for a confrontation, not a negotiation. The timeline of the unfolding tragedy was a rapid descent into chaos. On August 11th and 12th, the atmosphere on the kopje crackled with tension. Skirmishes broke out between the striking miners and those who had not joined the strike, as well as with security guards and police. 2 police officers and 2 security guards were killed, along with 3 miners, during these early clashes. These deaths, though tragic, were then used to justify an even more aggressive police response. The media, often complicit in amplifying the state's narrative, began to paint the striking miners as a violent mob, further demonizing them in the public eye. By August 16th, the stage was tragically set. Thousands of police officers, armed with automatic rifles, shotguns, and armored vehicles, encircled the kopje. The air was thick with anticipation, a heavy silence punctuated only by the distant whir of helicopters. The police had a plan: to cordon off the area and force the miners to surrender their weapons. But the execution of this plan and the subsequent events would forever stain the nation's conscience. At approximately 3:45 p.m., the order was given. Water cannons roared to life, unleashing powerful jets of water at the defiant crowd. Tear gas canisters arced through the air, exploding in clouds of acrid smoke. The miners, momentarily disoriented, began to disperse. Then, the first shots rang out. It was not a warning shot. It was a fusillade. High-velocity bullets tore through the air, ripping into flesh, shattering bone. The sound was deafening, a horrifying symphony of screams and gunshots that echoed across the dry plains. The scenes that followed were horrific. Miners, some still clutching their traditional weapons, fell to the ground, their lives extinguished in an instant. Others ran, desperately seeking cover, only to be cut down as they fled. The police, seemingly operating without restraint, continued to fire, pursuing the fleeing miners into the surrounding bushes. The initial confrontation at the main crawl enclosure on the kopje was only the beginning. A second, equally brutal, phase of the massacre unfolded a short distance away, in a rocky outcrop known as Small Kopje. Here, cornered and with nowhere to run, more miners were gunned down in a hail of bullets. The bodies lay scattered amongst the rocks, a gruesome tableau of state-sanctioned violence. When the dust settled, the unimaginable truth began to emerge. 34 miners lay dead, their lives brutally cut short. Over 70 more were injured, some critically. The images that flooded screens around the world were shocking. Bloodied bodies, terrified survivors, and the cold, unfeeling precision of the police operation. It was a massacre, pure and simple, and it sent shockwaves through a nation still grappling with the ghosts of its past. For many, it was a chilling reminder of the apartheid era, when the state routinely used violence to suppress dissent. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of grief, outrage, and frantic attempts to control the narrative. The government, initially defensive, attempted to justify the police action as a necessary response to armed and violent individuals. The police claimed self-defense, arguing that they were under attack. However, as independent journalists and human rights organizations began to piece together the events, a very different picture emerged. Eyewitness accounts, ballistic evidence, and photographic analysis revealed a pattern of excessive force, indiscriminate firing, and a callous disregard for human life. The investigation process, in the wake of such a colossal tragedy, was fraught with controversy and accusations of a cover-up. A judicial commission of inquiry, led by Judge Ian Farlam, was established by President Jacob Zuma. Its mandate was to investigate the events leading up to and during the massacre, and to make recommendations. The commission heard extensive testimony from miners, police officers, lawmen executives, and government officials. The proceedings were often dramatic, with harrowing accounts of the shooting and damning evidence of police misconduct. During the inquiry, it became clear that the police had failed to adequately plan for the dispersal operation. There was a lack of clear command and control, and individual officers often acted without direct orders, firing indiscriminately. Evidence also emerged that some miners were shot in the back while fleeing, and that some bodies had been moved and weapons planted to support the police's self-defense claim. The role of lawmen was also scrutinized, with accusations that they had pressured the police for a forceful intervention and had failed to address the legitimate grievances of their workers. The government's complicity, through its rhetoric in the deployment of a heavily armed police force, also came under intense scrutiny. The Farlam Commission's final report, released in 2015, was a damning indictment of the police. It found that the police had used excessive force and that their actions were unjustifiable. It criticized the police's operational planning and command structures and found that senior police officials had misled the commission. While the report did not find a direct conspiracy, it highlighted the systemic failures that led to the massacre. It also criticized lawmen for its role in failing to address the miners' legitimate concerns and for pressuring the police. Crucially, it called for further investigations into criminal liability. However, despite the Commission's findings, accountability has been agonizingly slow and incomplete. While some police officers face charges of murder and attempted murder, convictions have been scarce. Many believe that those at the highest levels of command and the political figures who sanctioned the brutal intervention have largely escaped justice. The families of the victims continue to live with the pain of their loss, and the promise of compensation has been slow to materialize. The Marikana massacre remains a gaping wound in the collective consciousness of South Africa. It exposed the enduring fault lines of a society still grappling with economic inequality, police brutality, and the unfulfilled promises of democracy. It stands as a stark reminder that true freedom and justice extend beyond political liberation to encompass economic dignity and the right to peaceful protest without fear of state-sponsored violence. The memory of those 34 miners, their lives brutally extinguished on that dusty copy, serves as a perpetual siren call for accountability, justice, and a more equitable future for all South Africans. The story of Marikana is not just a true crime. It is a profound national tragedy, a chilling testament to how easily power can be abused when the voices of the marginalized are silenced with bullets. Case 12. In the heart of this unfolding drama lived Chris Hani, a man whose name resonated with both fervent admiration and deep-seated animosity. Born Martin Thimbisel Hani in 1942 in a small village in the Eastern Cape, he had adopted Chris, as his nom de guerre in the underground struggle. He was a paradox of intellect and raw charisma, a history and English literature graduate who had traded academic pursuits for the brutal realities of armed revolution. Hani was the General Secretary of the South African Communist Party SACP and a powerful, charismatic leader within the African National Congress ANC. He was also the former Chief of Staff of Umkhonto we Sizwe MK, the ANC's armed wing, a position that solidified his reputation as a fearless and decisive commander. For millions of black South Africans, Hani was a revolutionary hero, a voice of the people, and a symbol of unwavering commitment to liberation. His fiery rhetoric and unyielding stance against apartheid had earned him the adoration of the masses, particularly the youth, who saw him as an embodiment of their own struggles and aspirations. But for those clinging to the vestiges of white minority rule, Hani was a dangerous radical, a communist terrorist, and a direct threat to their way of life. His very existence was an affront, his vision of a non-racial South Africa anathema. He was a man marked by history, a man whose influence was too potent to be ignored, and for some, too potent to be allowed to live. The architects of Hani's demise were two men whose lives were steeped in the bitter ideology of white supremacy. The first was Janusz Wałęsa, a Polish immigrant who had arrived in South Africa in the 1980s. A man adrift, Wałęsa found a twisted sense of belonging and purpose within the far-right extremist circles of South Africa. He was a drifter with a history of minor criminal infractions, a man whose personal failures seemed to fuel a deep-seated resentment and a desperate need to attach himself to something larger than himself, however twisted that something might be. He was drawn to the rhetoric of the Conservative Party and the Afrikaner where stands bewedging AWB, a neo-Nazi organization led by the notorious Eugene Terreblanche, whose rallies Wałęsa attended with fervent devotion. Wałęsa was a man consumed by the fear of a black majority government, a fear that was meticulously cultivated and exploited by those who benefited from the existing power structures. He was a weapon, easily wielded by those with a clearer agenda. The second, and arguably more insidious, figure was Clive Derby Lewis, a former Conservative Party Member of Parliament and a prominent figure in the extreme right wing. Derby Lewis was a man of intellect and influence, a stark contrast to Wałęsa's rough-hewn demeanor. He was a product of the apartheid system, a man who believed in the absolute necessity of white dominance and saw the impending democratic transition as an unforgivable betrayal of his heritage and his people. Derby Lewis was not a street brawler like Wałęsa. He was a manipulator, a planner, a man who could articulate his hateful ideology with a chilling precision. He believed that by eliminating a key figure like Hani, they could derail the peace process, ignite a racial war, and ultimately preserve white rule. He saw Hani's assassination not as an act of senseless violence, but as a strategic strike, a desperate gamble to turn back the tide of history. His wife, Gay Derby Lewis, though ultimately acquitted of murder, was later convicted of conspiracy to murder, her involvement underscoring the deep-seated ideological fervor that permeated their lives. The plan was meticulously, chillingly simple. Hani, despite his high profile, lived a relatively accessible life, eschewing the heavy security details that often surrounded other political figures. He lived in a quiet, unassuming suburb of Boksburg, away from the bustling political centers, a place where he hoped to find some semblance of normalcy with his family. On that fateful Saturday morning, April 10th, 1993, Hani returned to his home on Andromeda Street in Dawn Park after buying newspaper. It was a mundane act, a brief moment of quiet in a life of constant upheaval. He stepped out of his car, carrying a bag, his guard perhaps momentarily lowered. Wałęsa, who had been lying in wait, his heart likely pounding with a mixture of fear and twisted resolve, seized his opportunity. He emerged from his vehicle, a red Ford Laser, and approached Hani. The first shot struck Hani in the head, instantly incapacitating him. As Hani lay on the ground, Wałęsa fired 3 more shots, 2 into his body, ensuring a gruesome finality. The sound of the gunshots shattered the quiet suburban morning, echoing a far greater devastation across the nation. Hani's 15-year-old daughter, Namakwizi, witnessed the horrific event. Her scream, a raw cry of anguish, pierced the air, a devastating testament to the brutality of the act. Neighbors, drawn by the gunshots and her cries, emerged to find Hani's lifeless body on the driveway. The investigation that followed was a race against time, a desperate scramble to apprehend the killers before the country plunged into an abyss of retaliatory violence. Fortunately, a quick-thinking neighbor, Retha Harms, saw Walu speeding away from the scene and recorded the registration number of his vehicle. This crucial piece of information became the cornerstone of the immediate pursuit. Within hours, Walu was apprehended near the scene of the crime. He offered no resistance, almost as if he expected to be caught, or perhaps believed his mission was accomplished. Under interrogation, Walu quickly confessed to the murder. He also implicated Clive Derby Lewis, revealing that Derby Lewis had provided him with the weapon, the .88 9mm pistol, and had helped him plan the assassination. The motive, Walu claimed, was to plunge the country into chaos, to halt the transition to majority rule, and to ultimately preserve the white minority government. The discovery of Derby Lewis's involvement sent shockwaves through the political establishment. It revealed the terrifying depth of the conspiracy and the willingness of certain elements to resort to extreme violence to cling to power. The investigation swiftly moved to implicate Gate Derby Lewis as well, though her role was later debated in court. The police worked tirelessly, their actions under intense scrutiny from a nation on the brink. They gathered forensic evidence, corroborated witness statements, and meticulously pieced together the timeline of the conspiracy. The trial of Walu and Derby Lewis became a focal point of national and international attention. The courtroom became a crucible where the raw emotions of a fractured nation were laid bare. The prosecution meticulously presented their case, demonstrating the premeditation and the ideological motivations behind the assassination. Walu, often appearing cold and unrepentant, maintained his belief that he was acting for a greater cause. Derby Lewis, ever the ideologue, attempted to justify his actions as a desperate measure to prevent what he viewed as the collapse of civilization. In October 1993, Janusz Walu and Clive Derby Lewis were found guilty of murder and conspiracy to murder. Both were sentenced to death, a sentence later commuted to life imprisonment after the abolition of capital punishment in South Africa. Gay Derby Lewis was initially convicted of conspiracy to murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but her conviction was later overturned on appeal due to insufficient evidence. The assassination of Chris Hani was a moment of profound national crisis. The country held its breath, teetering on the precipice of civil war. The raw grief and anger amongst black South Africans were palpable. Calls for revenge echoed through the townships, and violent protests erupted. It was at this critical juncture that Nelson Mandela, with his characteristic wisdom and calm, stepped forward. He addressed the nation on television, not as the leader of the ANC, but as a statesman, a father figure appealing for peace and unity. His powerful speech, delivered with dignity and solemnity, called for calm and urged South Africans to resist the temptation of violence. He acknowledged the pain and anger, but implored the nation to honor Hani's legacy by committing to peace and the democratic transition. His words, delivered at a moment of extreme peril, proved instrumental in defusing the explosive situation. In the aftermath, the assassination, instead of derailing the democratic process as its perpetrators had intended, inadvertently accelerated it. The sheer brutality of the act and the widespread condemnation it generated galvanized political leaders and negotiators to intensify their efforts towards a peaceful settlement. The murder of Hani, a man who had dedicated his life to liberation, ironically became a catalyst for the very freedom he had fought for. It highlighted the urgent need for a democratic South Africa, a nation where such acts of politically motivated violence would be consigned to the history books. Years later, the specter of Chris Hani's assassination continues to loom large in South African memory. Janusz Walu remained incarcerated for decades, becoming a symbol of the enduring divisions and unresolved traumas of the apartheid era. His parole bids were met with fierce opposition, particularly from Hani's family and the SACP, who viewed his continued incarceration as a testament to the ongoing pursuit of justice. Clive Derby Lewis was granted medical parole in 2015 and died in 2016. The case of Chris Hani serves as a stark reminder of the fragile nature of peace, the enduring power of ideology, and the profound impact a single act of violence can have on the course of a nation's history. It is a story of hatred, loss, and the remarkable resilience of a people determined to forge a new destiny from the ashes of a brutal past. Thank you so much for watching tonight's True Crime Stories. I hope you found it as captivating as I did. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from tonight? And how did you feel about the story? Remember to stay safe, get some rest, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and good night.